Good morning. I am Anu Surya, Assistant Professor, Department of English. So in this lecture, we will discuss briefly about metaphysical poetry. What is metaphysical poetry? Some of the features of metaphysical poetry and some of the major figures of metaphysical poetry. So let's begin. So what is metaphysical poetry? So metaphysical poetry is a group of poetry or school of poetry originated in the late 16th century and the early 17th centuries. And the term metaphysical poetry was coined by Dr. Samuel Johnson. And he borrowed the term from Dryden's phrase about John Donne. The phrase goes like this: he affects the metaphysics. So, what is the definition of metaphysical poetry? So, as you can see on the screen, metaphysical poetry is a type of poetry or a school of poetry which emerged in the late 16th and 17th centuries and that explored a deep and complex idea in a clever and intellectual way. It also deals with topics like life, spirituality, religion, afterlife, and time, etc. Our next topic is metaphysical poets. So basically, who were metaphysical poets? So metaphysical poets were a group of poets who practiced and propagated a different style of poetry, that is metaphysical poetry. It's the simple definition of metaphysical poets. So they can be considered as a group of poets of the 17th century, and mainly they were men of learning because their motto was to showcase their learning through their poetry. They were scholars and priests. So when you analyze some of the metaphysical poems, you can see that there's a perfect amalgamation of both spiritual, religious, and secular themes in their poetry. And they were information junkies. Information junkies in the sense that they were loaded with a lot of informations. And they were information junkies even before the information age. And one of the other features of metaphysical poets were they always tried to come with new things. They never tried to imitate things or other things in their past generations. They were always ready to do different things and they were always special in that matter. So, some of the major figures of metaphysical poetry. John Donne is one of the pioneers in metaphysical poetry. And in my opinion, if you want to read metaphysical poems, you must read the poems of John Donne. And some of the other figures of this school of poetry are George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, and Abraham Cowley. Coming to the next section of our slide, the features of metaphysical poetry. So the metaphysical poetry has a lot of features. One of the striking features of metaphysical poetry is the abrupt beginning or a shocking beginning. For example, if you take the poem The Canonization, and in my opinion, the poem Canonization is one of the finest specimens of metaphysical poetry. So, the first line of the poem, The Canonization, goes like this: for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. So, you can see that in the first line of the poem, there is a sudden beginning or there is a shocking beginning. So, it's a feature of metaphysical poetry. And the next one is the conversational tone or in an argumentative tone. All of the metaphysical poems are presented in a conversational tone. And the most important and the most striking feature of metaphysical poetry is the metaphysical conceits. So what is a metaphysical conceit? So a metaphysical conceit is just an extended metaphor. For example, for more clarification, a poem, a valediction forbidding morning, is one of the finest poems in metaphysical poetry. So in that poem, you can see that the lovers are compared to the two legs of a compass. So you can see that the lovers and the compass are entirely different things and entirely unrelated things. Even then, the poet is trying to make a comparison between these two unrelated things. So that's what metaphysical conceits is all about. So metaphysical conceits is one of the striking features of metaphysical poetry. And finally, a witty and clever language. The metaphysical poems usually deals with complex ideas, and these ideas are expressed in a witty and clever language and make the readers more interested and challenge the readers while they're reading the poetry. So that is all about metaphysical poetry, and I hope this lecture is helpful for the beginners of English language and literature, and thank you for listening.